inspiration, my friend. And to hear you talking about some of the issues there and putting facts on those stories and meat on the bones of those stories, you are an absolute humiliation to the mainstream media. I mean, you really are. You're talking about stuff. I mean, you are, and you don't need to be. I know you're a modest guy. But I've been watching and listening to your broadcast for many, many years. I go back to watching you when you, I suppose, the famous time when you showed us what was going on at Bohemia Grove in California. And you're to be absolutely congratulated for that. And I think I said to you,
well, brother, you're to be congratulated launching your own cable station, reaching millions on mainline cable and syndicated radio, and succeeding, failing, succeeding. I mean, it's amazing. So you're my hero. That's why I don't want you saying I'm a hero, because all of us who are fighting against tyranny are just trying to survive and build a better world. So collectively, those of us that love life and humanity and fair play and have goodwill, we are basically God's sunshine in the world. So I'm just one more little ray of light with you, my brother.
Well, thanks very much, Alex. I mean, we can start anywhere. I mean, I loved listening to your monologue there. Let's talk for a minute, I suppose, about the paedophile, the historic paedophile sex abuse scandal, historic sex abuse allegations.
That you and David Icke and others exposed a long time ago, and is now, by the numbers, what David said, the exact people he claimed are being caught with the torture dungeons, the dead little kids, the royal family. I mean, this is over the top. Let's, and while he's talking, let's show some of those headlines. Go ahead.
Oh, it's terrible, Alex. You're absolutely right. David wrote a book in 1998 called The Biggest Secret. Again, you're to be commended because, you know, back in the early days, you had him on so many times talking about this. David Cameron, of course, is not talking about VIP paedophiles and members of parliament paedophiles and Elm Guesthouse and Dolphin Square. He's not talking about that. He's talking about Rochdale and Muslim paedophile rings and saying it's a national scandal and it's a national security, it's a dangerous national security problem. But of course, what he's not talking about are the allegations that are with the police, with Scotland Yard in London, with police forces all over England, the Dixon revelations, the Dixon dossier, which you've spoken about so many times on your programme, which, dozens and dozens of former MPs, even prime ministers, Alex, ministers have been named, names have been given to police forces around this country.
And for those that don't know, I mean, we're putting articles on screen. Everything you're saying has come out in major papers. That they're saying upwards of a third of Parliament, it looks like, is involved. I mean, this is a cult.
It's suspected, Alex. It's incredible. And one of the most staggering revelations that's come out, of course, in the last few months is that about the young boy, Vishal Mehrotra. I'm just looking to the left of my notes. I've not got anything written down, just a couple of bullet points there, because I don't want to get this wrong. But Vishal's father was a magistrate, so he was a judge. And he alleged that his son, by the way, Alex, he was 8 years old, and he disappeared on the day that Prince Charles married Lady Diana Spencer. That's when the boy disappeared. He was 8 years old. The father had a long and successful career as a magistrate. Now, you know all this, but maybe some of your listeners don't, some of your viewers don't. His father basically contends that his son was murdered, quite possibly at Elm Guesthouse, which is a guest house in London, which is frequented by VIPs, members of parliament, again, ministers. We're talking about the upper echelons of society for years and years and years. That's a staggering thing. And in the Telegraph newspaper, in the last couple of days, you mentioned the Telegraph earlier on, they've published another interview with the Vishambra. Yeah, it's Vishambra, is the boy's father, the 8-year-old boy. And it's absolutely staggering, Alex. And as you've reported on, to your credit, the British Home Secretary, Theresa May, is absolutely complicit in the cover-up of all of this, because she's put 2 chairs of this inquiry in. What were their names again? The 2 chairs, Butler Sloss, Dame Butler Sloss, of course, the first one put in there, with ties to these people, with ties to the people who might very well be investigated, might very well be named in these documents. And of course, recently, they've announced a woman from New Zealand, a judge called Lowell Goddard, all sorts of things coming out about her and her, I suppose, lack of credibility in taking on this inquiry. She's gone on the record to say it might take 5 years, Alex. How convenient that is, that it might take 5 years before we get to the bottom of all of this.
Well, that's right. And then we've also seen, speaking of Australia, but also in the UK and the US and Canada, we've seen now liberal judges, close quote, saying, hey, pedophilia is just a choice and children can love too. Classic NAMBLA statements. now trying to legitimize sex with children. I mean, they're actually starting to come out of their pedophile closet.
It's unbelievable, Alex, when you hear stuff like that. I mean, you know from talking to me over the years, there's no hiding it. I'm an Irishman. I grew up with this in Waterford City in the Republic of Ireland. I grew up with it. And a great friend of mine who won't mind being named, Derek Power. Derek was destroyed as a young boy by a bishop in County Waterford, a guy called Smith, who ended up dying in prison. We know in Ireland, Alex, that the then Cardinal Ratzinger, who went on to become Pope Benedict, was ringing up, and bear with me, I know I might be going on a tangent, but there's a reason.
No, get into the Vatican, get into all of it. I mean, this is sick.
It's sick stuff. We know that Ratzinger was phoning bishops in Dublin, in Cork, in Limerick, in Kerry, all over Ireland, to tell those bishops, look, we know in the Vatican, we know that there's crazy stuff going on in Ireland, that priests and Christian brothers are buggering and raping and destroying children. But don't ever cooperate with the police. We have this on the record. That lousy, I'm not going to swear and use bad language on your program, but before he became Pope, he was complicit, Alex. He was an accessory after the fact, because he was telling bishops, move those priests to other parishes.
And that's why they reportedly helicoptered him off to that Italian castle, was these documents were starting to come out.
Absolutely right. There's a man, Alex, who's going to be in hiding for the rest of his life, will never leave the Vatican City, because there's that much anger and outrage in Catholic communities around the world. And we see it playing out here. One of the things I loved you talking about over the years on your shows was the Franklin Credit Union scandal and Lawrence C. King. Alex, it's playing out here now in England, in London, in Manchester, in Birmingham. You know, we know that, I mean, Scotland Yard have admitted. In fact, I've interviewed Michael Shrimpton, who's been a guest on your program before, a barrister and a guy who's been connected up to the gills with the security services in Britain. I mean, he's gone on the record to say that, Edward Heath, former Prime Minister of this country, molested children. People will say it's a cheap thing for me to say now because Heath is dead and it's easy to say something about the dead. But former MI5 officers, Scotland Yard detectives have been talking amongst themselves and have been letting little bits of information slip out to journalists like you, journalists like me, to say that children were murdered, not necessarily on the orders of people like Ted Heath, but they were murdered by the security services in case they ever dared to tell a policeman or woman about what.
Because again, once the pedophiles do a big enough crime and they're a government official, the rest of the government who isn't involved has to cover it up, because the view is it would bring down the whole government. But see, long term, it just lets this stuff breed, and then it will end up bringing down everything 10 times worse because they protected it.
That's absolutely right, Alex. It's absolutely right. I've said before, I loved hearing you at the beginning of the program saying it's a great time to be alive, because I think you're absolutely right to say that. I have this thing, I'm an eternal optimist like you. I have this thing in my gut where I believe that this is going to be one of the great catalysts in bringing down this evil, horrible, sickening cabal that you so eloquently described at the beginning of the broadcast. Because, Alex, when ordinary, and I'm an ordinary man, you're an ordinary man, but so many of the people that we share our lives with, so many of our neighbours, and you've got children in school, some of the parents of the children that your kids go to school with, they don't want to hear this, Alex. They don't want to hear you talk about it. They don't want to hear me talk about it.
Out of sight, out of mind, but children are being disappeared by the tens of thousands per country into sex slavery, into snuff films. It's being covered up. We need to tell people that don't want to hear about it that they are now becoming complicit and aiding and abetting these shadowy rings. From your deep research, we've gone over some of the evidence, some of the big stories with this happening. From your research, I mean, Jimmy Savile, the top BBC host, who had the highest level security clearance with the royal family, can come and go at night, best friends with Prince Charles, found with torture dungeons, dead little kids, necrophilia, everything the kids have said now coming out. A bunch of his friends end up dying. Drivers end up dying. Butlers end up dying. Anybody blowing the whistle ends up dying. You see this guy in his weird jumpsuits, the archetype of a pervert weirdo, and then this is the confidant of the royal family. They're constantly finding dead children's bodies buried on royal estates. What is going on? What is at the top? In your gut, how deep does this go, and what's their end game?
In my gut, I've never said this, Alex. Well, I have. I've said it on my own program. In my gut, I believe, not because he's a friend of mine, but because I believe my credibility, your integrity and my integrity is too important. Not because he's a mate of mine, but I'll tell you, I think David Icke is absolutely spot on. It goes to the heart of royalty in this country. It's prime ministers, like we said earlier on, justice ministers. It's satanic, Alex. I absolutely believe that much of this is satanic. And when I think about that, I think back to that exposure that you brought out all those years ago of what was going on at Bohemia Grove. It just all adds up, you know. David talks about dot connecting. You connect the dots on your program. I'll tell you what sickens me, Alex. You know what they're doing here in England now? Your viewers, I know your producers and you will be aware of a woman called Melanie Shaw. Melanie is from Nottingham. You know what they're doing to Melanie all the time, Alex? They're locking her up on stupid charges because Melanie was abused at a children's home in Nottingham many, many, many years ago. And in the last few years, she gave evidence to the police in Nottingham and the police in Britain, in wider Britain. And nothing was done about the evidence that Melanie gave. So what did she start doing then? She's a very feisty woman. She started screaming from the rooftops and shouting about the fact that, my evidence isn't being taken seriously. Why have people not been at least interviewed under caution, even if not arrested? Well, they've just banged her up for the second time recently, Alex, on a load of trumped up charges with no evidence. They've accused her of threatening her neighbours, of harassing her neighbours, of attempting to burn her garden, her neighbour's garden shed. Alex, they're locking them up. We live in this disgraceful world that you've been doing your utmost for years to shine a light on, where the lousy bastards, and I'm sorry for saying that word on your programme, who did this are walking around, they're driving Bentleys, they're writing laws and legislations, they're eating caviar tonight, and the people that were abused by them, Alex, they're getting locked up for telling the truth. They're locking them up on trumped up charges. And your producers will know they can just, they can Google Melanie Shaw and find out what's been happening to her. And it's so terrible, Alex. It's never happened to me, thank God. And I don't know anybody, apart from my great friend Derek Perrin in Waterford, but I don't know anybody in England whom it's happened to. But to have that absolute reality that we have, where the victims are being locked up and the people who did it are walking around. And I'll just go back to say one final thing on it. I believe, and the reason why I mentioned, the ordinary men and women who think this is beyond the pale, when this all comes out, Alex, those people are going to finally have to face up to what their leaders are doing and what's behind their leaders, the hidden hand. They're going to have to face up to it, Alex. And then many of the other issues that you've been revealing on your program for years, whether it's about 9/11, whether it's about central banks and what they're doing and trade agreements and all of that, people will start to realise that. So I think this might be a watershed moment in Britain where people are finally going to see who these people are.
Oh, I agree. And we're going to see more and more of these watershed moments across the board. Richie Allen's our guest. Alex Jones Show, if you just tuned in, we're going to give the number out in a moment and take your calls coming up if we cover some geopolitical issues. But Richie, that was my next question, and then you started covering it without me asking it. Just like the Vatican for 30 years denied that they had pedophile rings throughout the organization from the bottom to the top, it turned out it was worse than what the victims were even saying in almost every case. Then expanding on that, they were not able, despite all the king's horses and all the king's men, to cover it up. The UK's not able. The Germany's not able. The Netherlands aren't able. Brazil's not able. But a bigger question is, what happens as all these groups end up getting brought down, A, and then B, why is it pedophile rings running things? I mean, I just have no perception, no kinship with these people of how they would be attracted to children. But going beyond having sex with children, which I have zero attraction to and have a repulsion to, I really have a repulsion to hurting them. I mean, when I think about somebody hurting a child, I'll be honest, I want to kill people. And I'm not saying I'm a tough guy, but I'm like an average man. I mean, I can get superhuman strength when somebody's messing with my kids. And I mean, if I caught somebody hurting my kids, the cops aren't coming. I'm going to come after you. And no wonder they want our guns, Richie. No wonder they want a police state total grid in place that they control to protect them from us, because they're scared all this is going to come out, because they know everything hidden ends up coming out. So when we come back, I want to ask you those questions. A, why is it pedophile rings? What are these, psychic vampires? I mean, what's going on? Why torture them? Why was it Satanism? I mean, it turns out in all these cases that are confirmed, a huge nest of pedophiles at the BBC, that it's Satanism. So We're going to talk about this when we come back.
We're on the march. The